All right, so good morning or good afternoon to everyone who's watching us today through YouTube. We have another IBCI event, and where we are really glad to have with us prominent professors and an authority. I will excuse myself to present everyone, to read everyone's resume, and I will read our main speaker's resume now, Professor Teodosia. Professor Teodosia, we're really glad to have you here. Professor Teodosia is a Jaharis Faculty Fellow at DePaul College of Law. She's PhD in Competition Law from the European University Institute. Her scholarship has been published or is forthcoming in the Journal of Competition Law and Economics, Berkeley Business Law Journal, World Competition, Loyola Consumer Law Review, and the American Journal of Law and Medicine. Today, we'll tackle the relationship between healthcare and antitrust. Please, Professor Teodosia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm truly honored that I have the opportunity to present my work and receive the comments and the feedback of our world-class professors and researchers. So today I would like to share with you my ideas and my thoughts on a new wave of healthcare mergers that is taking place in the United States that I think may harm the most unhealthy among us. So over the past years, several health insurers such as Aetna have started merging with powerful drug suppliers such as CVS. And the question is, what do these companies hope to achieve by merging? They want to increase their access to our health data. They want to know where we go, what we buy, how much we sleep, if we can resist sugar, junk food, or nicotine, if we exercise, and how often we exercise. In other words, they aim to shape for each of us a unique digital health ID. And the question is why? There are two possibilities. The good scenario is that these companies want to gain access to our health data to improve our level of well-being. The bad scenario is that these companies aim to gain access to our health data to discriminate against the most unhealthy among us. Health insurers such as Aetna merge with powerful drug suppliers, the CVS, to increase their access to consumers' prescription history, shopping habits, and health-related data. And by harnessing this data, Aetna can identify the high-risk consumer groups that is likely to attract and to reduce their access to health insurance services. Aetna, for example, can achieve this goal by moving the drugs associated with the treatment of high-risk consumer groups to a higher cost-sharing tier. Essentially, this means that if you are healthy and fit, your drug coverage costs will be reduced following the merger. But if you're likely to get depressed or diabetic, your drug coverage costs may actually escalate. An official complaint that was filed with the Department of Health and Human Services in Florida in May 2014 reveals that this risk is real. The complaint actually illustrates that Florida insurers that offer health plans and health insurance services through the federal marketplace had structured the drug formularies and health plans to discourage citizens living with HIV from selecting the health plans. Essentially, these health insurers in Florida had classified all HIV drugs, including generics such as Atripla, in the tier with a higher cost sharing. Arguably, such discriminatory practices can drive individuals out of the health insurance services market, leaving them without any meaningful access to care. In other words, such discriminatory practices can frustrate one of the fundamental goals of the Affordable Care Act, which aims to prohibit health insurers from discriminating against citizens on the basis of their pre-existing health conditions and socioeconomic background. But importantly, mergers between health insurers and drug suppliers may not only reduce access to health insurance services for the high-risk consumers and the vulnerable populations that need health insurance coverage. More importantly, they may even contribute to the existing health disparities and inequalities in the United States. And this is because clinical evidence indicates the strong link between social determinants of health and health disparities among certain populations. Decades of research show that the most vulnerable populations are more likely to suffer from alcohol addiction, but they also face higher structural barriers to adapting a healthier lifestyle. Hence, data-driven mergers between health insurers and drug suppliers, instead of increasing access to health insurance services for the high-risk consumers that need health insurance coverage, they may actually make access easier for the low-risk consumers that have a healthier lifestyle. Given this risk, my research asks, can the US antitrust enforcers ban data-driven mergers in the healthcare field on the basis that they may increase the barriers to entry to health insurance services for the high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations that need access to health insurance services? The answer to this question, I believe, is not a straightforward one. And this is because antitrust law is primarily concerned with the overall welfare of the society, but it does not distinguish between different socioeconomic groups. Thus, from an antitrust law perspective, both high-risk consumers and low-risk consumers actually count equally. However, in this specific case, if the antitrust enforcers completely disregarded the merger's impact on high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations, they may risk applying antitrust law in a way that may even contribute to the existing health disparities in the United States. In light of this, my research also asked, do the US antitrust enforcers have the analytical framework to assess vertical mergers' impact on a specific segment of consumers? And by analyzing the applicable merger guidelines and the relevant case law, my article is the first one to identify the three potential ways in which the antitrust enforcers can address the harm that those mergers impose on high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations. First, they could argue that the vulnerable high-risk consumers constitute a separate relevant market, and therefore a merger that may lead to increased drug coverage costs for this specific segment of consumers can actually be prohibited. Second, they could argue that the merger's negative impact on the high-risk consumers should weigh more heavily than its positive impact on the low-risk ones, although in general, antitrust enforcers focus on the merger's net effect. Additionally, they could argue that the proposed merger should be prohibited because it may facilitate health insurers' efforts to evade the legal requirements imposed by the Affordable Care Act that aims to prohibit any type of discrimination on the basis of citizens' pre-existing health conditions. And I would like to elaborate a bit more on its technique antitrust enforcers can actually apply in order to address the harm that those mergers impose on the high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations. So first, the vulnerable high-risk consumers constitute a separate product market. So in general, when the antitrust enforcers examine a merger, they seek to identify and ban any transaction that may lead to increased market power or facilitate its exercise. And a merger may lead to increased market power if it is likely to encourage one or more firms to increase prices, harm quality, or diminish innovation as a result of limited competition. And to define mergers' anti-competitive effects, the antitrust enforcers very often define the relevant markets in which these anti-competitive effects are likely to be created. And to define the relevant markets, the antitrust enforcers very often apply the SNP test or else the hypothetical monopolies test. And by applying this test, the antitrust enforcers seek to identify and ban the smallest set of products for which hypothetical monopolists may profitably increase prices above the competitive level and for a sustained period of time. Additionally, the horizontal merger guidelines say that if the hypothetical monopolists can profitably target a group of customers for price increases, the antitrust enforcers may identify relevant markets defined around those targeted customers. And in the first part of my presentation, I explained that vertical data-driven mergers, such as the one between health insurers and a drug supplier, may lead to increased drug coverage costs for the high-risk consumers, but lower drug coverage costs for the low-risk ones. this specific segment of consumers, the high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations, may actually constitute a separate relevant market on the basis of the SNP test. And because the merger may lead to increased drug coverage costs for this specific segment of consumers, the merger may actually be prohibited. However, while the antitrust enforcers may try to ban the merger because it may lead to increased drug coverage costs for the high-risk consumers and the vulnerable populations, the merging parties may try to put forward the claim that the merger should be accepted because overall it would benefit consumers. For instance, the merging parties may claim that the harm the proposed merger may cause to high-risk consumers should be outweighed by the benefits it may bring to the low-risk ones. And such benefits may be easier access to health insurance services or lower drug coverage costs. But additionally, they could claim that the merger should be accepted because it may create some significant cost and qualitative efficiencies that may actually surpass any harm to competition in an irrelevant market. And the question is, what are these likely efficiencies? So in their official statements, CVS and Aetna said that the merger may lead to easier access to health insurance services and easier access to lower cost care, but also that the merger would improve the coordination of care. For example, following the merger, Aetna may be better able to identify the high-risk asthma patients that have not been prescribed inhalers and manage their care before they end up in emergency rooms with life-threatening asthma episodes. And the question is, how would the antitrust enforcers evaluate such efficiency claims? And on the basis of the Supreme Court's ruling in Philadelphia National Bank, a very important antitrust case, the antitrust enforcers may actually reject these efficiency claims and still prohibit the merger. And this is because in this case, the Supreme Court made clear that the merging parties' claimed deficiencies must occur in the specific market in which the merger is likely to create its anti-competitive effects. As a result, the antitrust enforcers may argue that the benefits enjoyed by the low-risk consumers cannot really outweigh the losses suffered by the high-risk ones. Also, they could claim that although the proposed merger may facilitate access to lower-cost care or even improve the coordination of care, such efficiencies would occur in the market for the provision of healthcare services and not the health insurance services market. And therefore, they could still ban the merger. However, if the story ended here, it would actually be incomplete. And this is because the merging parties may try to put forward one additional concern claim in order to convince the antitrust authorities that the merger should be accepted. For example, they may claim that following the merger, Aetna may not necessarily be able to identify all the high-risk asthma patients or all the high-risk consumers it is likely to attract and reduce their access to health insurance services. In other words, Aetna and CVS may claim that following the merger, because it may not be able to identify the high-risk consumers, these consumers do not necessarily constitute a separate relevant market. And of course, the possibility that this claim may actually be accepted cannot be precluded. However, in this case, if this claim was actually accepted, the antitrust authorities would assess the merger's net effect on competition and consumers. Crucially, in this case, if the merger's positive impact on low-risk consumers outweighed its negative impact on the high-risk ones, the antitrust authorities may actually accept the merger, although it may harm the most vulnerable populations and may also contribute to the existing health disparities in the United States. Given this risk, my research asks, what are the alternatives? And in this specific case, the antitrust enforcers may take the stance that the merger's negative impact on the high-risk consumers should weigh more heavily than its positive impact on the low-risk ones, although in general, the antitrust authorities assess the merger's net effect. And conducting this type of balancing exercise that encompasses distributive concerns may not be an easy choice for competition authorities. And this is because antitrust law is primarily concerned with the overall welfare of the society, but it does not distinguish between different socioeconomic groups. So from an antitrust law perspective, both the high-risk consumers, the likely to get depressed or diabetic, and the low-risk consumers, the healthy and fit, actually count equally. However, in this specific case, antitrust authorities may have good reasons to at least consider adapting this alternative form of antitrust analysis that takes into consideration distributive concerns on the basis of two core arguments. First, because in this case, our antitrust analysis and merger analysis would be in line with the main health objectives of the Affordable Care Act, which aims to prohibit health insurers from discriminating against citizens on the basis of their pre-existing health conditions and socioeconomic background. But also because this analysis would also consider that low-risk consumers actually benefit when high-risk consumers have access to health insurance services. And this is because of the extremely high costs low-risk consumers also incur when high-risk consumers lack any meaningful access to care. And such costs include financial externalities from uncompensated care, to the extent high-risk consumers end up in emergency room departments, emergency rooms, and they cannot afford the medical bills, and therefore these medical bills are paid by the taxpayers and the government. But also physical externalities from communicable diseases, such as in the case of COVID. And the third way in which the antitrust authorities could ban this merger is by taking the stance that the merger should be prohibited, because it may actually facilitate the merged entities' efforts to evade the Affordable Care Act that aims to prohibit health insurers from discriminating against citizens on the basis of their pre-existing health conditions and socioeconomic background. And importantly, so far, antitrust enforcers in the courts have not banned the merger on the basis that may allow the merged entity to evade the legal requirements imposed by the Affordable Care Act. However, prominent scholars in the United States, such as Stephen Salop, have argued that a merger that may facilitate the merged entity's efforts to evade the price regulation or any type of regulation that prohibits price discrimination could be prohibited on the basis that it may allow the merged entity to exercise pre-existing market power. And although the antitrust enforcers so far in the United States have not banned the merger on the basis of this concern, they may have good reasons to at least consider adapting this approach in the case at issue on the basis of two core arguments. First, because in this case, again, their antitrust analysis and merger analysis would be in line with the main goals of the Affordable Care Act, which aims to prohibit any type of discrimination against high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations. But also because by adapting this approach, the antitrust enforcers would actually avoid the difficult task and the complex task of weighing the circumstances and interests of two different consumer groups, the high-risk consumers and the low-risk consumers. To the extent that antitrust enforcers could argue that the merger may facilitate Aetna's efforts to evade the Affordable Care Act, they could prohibit this merger, because by evading the Affordable Care Act, Aetna may be better able to exercise its monopoly power in the health insurance services market. And although the antitrust enforcers have not banned a merger so far on the basis of this approach, I think that they have good reasons to consider this approach for the reasons I just explained. The core antitrust question of this paper, whether and to what extent antitrust enforcers can ban a merger, because it may allow the merged entity to harm the most vulnerable populations and the high-risk consumers, couldn't be more topical. First, because to the extent more big tech players enter the digital health services market, the more mergers we may see between health insurers and big tech players, or agreements between big tech players such as Google and Facebook and health insurers or healthcare providers. And the more we may see mergers between health insurers and tech players, or agreements between tech players and health insurers or healthcare providers, such as hospitals, the more opportunities there will be for discrimination against the high-risk consumers and the vulnerable populations. Second, because over the past year, several complaints have been filed in the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States, claiming that several health insurers in several states have reduced access to health insurance services, and they apply multiple discriminatory practices against citizens living with HIV or other chronic conditions. And third, because health disparities and health inequalities in the United States have been continuously escalating. And research demonstrates that the cost of health disparities and inequalities are extremely high. They include premature deaths, illness-related lost productivity, and also significant healthcare costs. Hence, health disparities and inequalities in the United States do not affect only the most unhealthy among us and the most vulnerable populations and the high-risk consumers, but the society and the welfare as a whole. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present my main research findings.
All right, thank you very much. Congratulations, Theodosia. It was all very interesting. I would pass the floor to Tatiana. Please, Tatiana.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you are. Are you able to hear me? Yeah, everything's fine. Hello, fellow colleagues on the panel. First, I would like to congratulate Theodosia for such a great paper and presentation today. It's a great honor for the Brazilian Healthcare Insurance and Plans regulatory body, INS, to join this debate. I would like to congratulate Eduardo and Vinicius for hosting this event, and would like to thank on behalf of our CEO, Mr. Paulo Rebelo, for the invitation. First, if you allowed me, I would like to provide some background information about the main difference between the American and the Brazilian healthcare system. I believe this could be helpful for discussion going on here today. But, well, first, the Brazilian healthcare system is a typical two-tier system. On the one hand, we have SUS, which is a huge public healthcare system. It can be compared to the UK NHS or to the French system. SUS provides universal, free, and comprehensive healthcare coverage. When I mean free, I mean 100% tax funded. There are no copays in place. And on the other hand, we have the private healthcare insurance market, which is regulated by INS. Once people hire those contracts, they do not lose their public system coverage. On the contrary, some services are only provided by the public system. I may mention vaccines and transplants. And today, 1/4 of the Brazilian population is covered by these insurance private contracts, but more than 50% of total expenses in Brazil is concentrated in the private system. This is due, of course, to some inequalities, but also due to inefficiencies in place sometimes. For example, there is a general low culture of integrated, coordinated care, preventive medicine. This will result, for example, in a widespread behavior of people in Brazil to run to emergencies if they have mild disease symptoms, what is clearly expensive. And secondly, I can highlight a difference between our regulatory bodies. INS would be like NAIC, but with federal jurisdictions, there are no state agencies in place like in the US, and INS regulates only healthcare insurance, not other insurance contracts. There is another body in Brazil regulating these general insurance contracts. Furthermore, INS, like NAIC state members sets a typical prudential regulation framework. I could mention requirements for entering to the market, solvency and liquidity requirements, but also INS sets a broad regulation on typical healthcare issues. I can highlight that one of the main differences between our system is that Brazil sets a mandatory coverage list for all healthcare insurance contracts. All insurers must comply with it. In medical contracts, it covers today more than 3,000 items. This is a lot of stuff, and we believe that this helps to mitigate asymmetric information between consumers and insurers, but also helps to avoid discrimination against consumers. Under Brazilian law, like under US law, discrimination against consumer is more than clearly prohibited. Also in Brazil, we regulate prices, especially individual prices. That's the one the consumers hire directly with the insurers, with no employers or legacy entities behind. This is around 20% of the market. And for those plans, annually, INS sets a price adjustments rate cap. And lastly, I can mention that what is important for the debate here today, that drugs are not typically covered by healthcare insurance contracts in Brazil. Once you are outside the hospital, they are typically covered once you are inside a hospital. So drugs are typically out-of-pocket market. Also, copays are more frequently in US than they are in Brazil. Of course, there are copays in private healthcare insurance contracts in Brazil, but they are more widespread in the US. So then I will move to the questions. Sorry for such a long background. Hope this was not annoying somehow. And first, I would like to thank my INS colleagues, Taina Leandro and Samir Matiz, for sharing some insights and thoughts on the matter. Well, the first question would be knowing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in M&As in US. If it has heightened somehow an already ongoing tendency of market concentration. In Brazil during the pandemic, especially during 2020, some elective surgeries, procedures, and general checkups were postponed mainly, providing some financial refresh for healthcare insurers in general. This surplus galvanized M&As, both horizontal, insurance companies, big insurance companies buying smaller ones, big insurance companies buying hospitals and labs. So I'd like to know if we can notice the same tendency in the US and if this somehow is related to the cases brought on your paper. Secondly, as brilliantly exposed on your paper, data sharing in health is a typical two-edged sword, if I can say. Well, we have the pros. It's clearly it's mandatory for me implementing an integrated full cycle preventive medicine, coordinated care, having a holistic view of the patient, and all value-based healthcare aims to have this full data, or the more you can, of the patient for this coordination. And also I can mention that jurisdictions with risk-based capital framework implemented, as in Brazil, as in US and in Europe, it's important to know the profile of your customers so you can better assess your underwriting risk, what we call, and assure you have proper capital for supported such a risk. But on the other side, we have the cons, the bad issues related. Data sharing will be the more clearly involved, which is clearly unlawful discrimination in Brazil and in US. And I also can mention that as you also posed on your article, that it frames the risk pooling framework as a whole. For assuring a sustainable healthcare market, we need to have this risk pooling properly handled. In Brazil, I can mention that we clearly enacted a GDPR law, like we call Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados. It was clearly inspired on European GDPR, and based on it, people may consent to share their data, as well as they know the purpose of this data sharing clearly. And this would be a legal sharing of data, but discrimination would be unlawful. So knowing that and based on your experience, I would like to know if you have any recommendations for Brazilian authorities to harness, galvanize positive effects of such sharing of data, and also any recommendations to assure that discrimination is not in place. What cautions should we take? What we should be watchful of, keep an eye on? That would be great. And lastly, in your paper, if I got it right, you recommend that US antitrust authorities split the relevant market between the right risk customers and the low risk customers. That's a great idea. But for me, it's not clear how would be the criteria applied for such categorization. Would it be patient's age, like the elderly one being the risk, the right risk profile, chronic disease, any social criteria in place, and how antitrust authority would gather such data. Thank you so much for the invitation and an opportunity to share such a panel, and congratulate once more Theodosia for such a brilliant and provocative paper. Thank you very much.
Well, Tatiana, I thank you. You made a very brilliant presentation and matched a lot to the paper, and now allow our friend Mr. Frederic to come in and give his insights. Frederic, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Eduardo, for your invitation. Theodosia's paper is a fascinating paper. I have so much things to say, but in a more academic perspective. So it is very optimal for us to mix the Tatiana views, the views from a regulator, and the mine more on the academic side. So 2 points to begin on Theodosia's paper and true interest. First, Theodosia addresses the issue of vertical mergers in the health industry. Here, it is a merger between an insurance provider and a pharmacy chain. But what is at stake in this vertical merger is health data. Tatiana previously spoke about GDPR, the issue of personal data. Here, it is exactly the point. And we anticipate that we will have a lot of mergers involving big techs in this area. And it is something like a test in order to see what are the risks, what are the stakes of a merger, allowing a market player to exploit, to use data from patients. It is not an anticipatory case because, for instance, we had recently the merger, the acquisition, in fact, of Fitbit by Google. And here it is the same concern. We had this concern in the European Commission, for instance, to see to what extent we can have an adverse consequence on competition raised by this acquisition. But here, it is not only on the field of competition. It is not just a matter of free and fair competition. It is a matter of public health and a risk to see some people excluded from the market of health insurance. So again, it is not just a matter of efficiency. We have some distributional concern, that is to say, to adjust the premium regarding the specific risk of each consumer, of each patient. In fact, it is a matter of personalization of insurance premium. So we have a distributive concern, and in addition, we have an issue in terms of fundamental rights. I am an economist. I'm not I'm not the best person to address fundamental rights questions. But here, it is not only an issue of access to the market. It is an issue of access to health services. So it is a central issue. So some points, but perhaps very quick in order to leave a sufficient room for global discussion. Some points on Theodosia's paper. First, if we use a personal data in the health sector in order to define insurance premium, it can be positive in terms of global welfare. As soon as we have a discrimination, as soon as we have a personalization of a price, the welfare could be enhanced. Two examples to be quick. First, on the insurance market, we can address two global issues. The first one is adverse selection. We can know what are precisely the characteristics of each people, of each consumers. And we can address, on the second hand, the moral hazard question. That is to say, we can supervise the behavior of people in order to adjust the premium, or in order to provide an advice to protect its own health. So, in fact, we can say, okay, at the efficiency point of view, at the allocative efficiency point of view, we have no problems. But we can have several concerns in terms of economic analysis. The first one, if a big tech will acquire a health data provider, it can both impair the competition between platforms, because you can preempt essential data, high quality data, and you can, in the same time, within your ecosystem, distort the intra-platform competition. That is to say, you can implement self-preferencing strategies. So we can have in the health sector concerns very comparable to the one we had when Microsoft bought LinkedIn, or when Apple acquired Shazam. That is to say, we have first a competition problem. But it is not only a matter of competition. It can be also a matter of welfare, but not welfare defined as a global aggregate, like our consumer welfare, but welfare in which we take into consideration distributional aspects. That is to say, it is very difficult to aggregate the welfare of the wealthiest and the welfare of the more vulnerable people in the society. In fact, it is a very old debate in economics. It is a debate between the utilitarian views and the Rawls one. Here, we can say we can have a progress in terms of global efficiency, but we can impair or make the situation of the poorest even worse than it was initially. So the proposal of Theodosia to distinguish between two relevant markets is very interesting regarding this point of view. That is to say, when we compare a system, an universal system like the British NHS, like the French Sécurité Sociale, I can speak French for a little moment, or the Brazilian system that Tatiana has just described, we have a process of mutualization. The mutualization, in fact, is a way to subsidize the poorest people. In fact, people with the bad risk in insurance term can be protected by something like an average price. When we make a personalization, it is positive for people with a good profile, but it is negative for the other. So we have a change. We have perhaps a progress in terms of efficiency, but we can question this progress in terms of political choice, social acceptance, and so on. And what is very interesting is that as soon as we do not reason only in terms of allocative efficiency, static efficiency, we have a more general issue, a more general concern about what is the sense of law-end economics. That is to say, do we search to enhance efficiency? It is a very conventional law-end economics, born in Chicago now 80 years ago, or we can discuss the critiques that are formulated from the law and political economy movement. That is to say, are distributional concern, legitimate concern. I can insist on a lot of points which are raised by Theodosia's paper. For instance, the consideration of two-sided markets. That is to say, can we consider that insurance market is something like a two-sided platform and compensate the cost on the side and the benefits on the other one? Theodosia demonstrates brilliantly that in fact it is not a platform here. So it can be a way to discuss the paper. We can also have some parallels that are very interesting to investigate. For instance, with environmental issues, we can have an effect negative on the competition on the given market, but an effect positive on the global welfare in terms of externalities and so on. Here, for instance, the personalization can be a good thing in terms of efficiency if we consider this only at the level of the insurance market. But in fact, public health is characterized by externalities. I think we are in this situation now for 2 years. We understand easily what are issues in terms of public health. So perhaps the insurance market will be more efficient in economic terms, but if the health of the poorest people, of the weakest people, is not covered by health services, perhaps we have negative externalities. So it is very difficult to make a balance between the welfare of consumer on the relevant market and on the other side, the welfare of the whole society on different point of view. I think I can stop here, but you have in the Theodosia paper a lot of very accurate insight about the efficiency effect of vertical merger, about discrimination, and so on. So I have just an advice to provide. You should read the Theodosia's paper.
All right, thank you very much, Frederic. Clever insights and questions. Vinicius, could you jump in?
Yes, thank you, Eduardo. I'm going to be very brief because a lot of brilliant people spoke before me. Some of the things I thought Frederick said, and one of the things I can add to this think of balance is I think about between regulation and competition, and I think in Brazil maybe it's clear because I don't know if the ability of the companies to avoid the regulations are really a problem of competition law. Maybe they're a problem of bad regulation, not well-designed regulation, because this market, this separate the pooling and the think about the insurance risk. Maybe it's like a needs a better market design, not a change in just a provocative idea, not a change in the competition reasoning. Because if you can change for health, and I agree with Frederick, this change could be used for all the other objectives like environmental issues and other issues. But the conclusion is the same. Theodosia's paper is wonderful, well written, and it's important to read. Thank you, Eduardo.
Eduardo, you're mute, or perhaps Theodosia?
Yeah, sorry. I think Theodosia may address all the questions and comments, and after we can collect some other comments from Tatiana, Frederic, Vinicius, and myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful comments. Yeah, I would like to address your questions and comments. So I would like to start with the last comment of Vinicius Klein, who argued that maybe it's an issue of bad regulation, it's not a competition issue. So maybe the solution would be to improve the regulations in the healthcare services market or the privacy regulation, and not try to address the problems that I identified in my paper, in my presentation, through competition law. And I would like to elaborate a bit more on this point. So first of all, the Affordable Care Act aims to undermine health insurance incentives to discriminate against high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations by implementing a risk adjustment policy, which means that health insurers with sicker subscribers receive financial assistance from health insurers with low-risk subscribers. And also, the Affordable Care Act compels health insurers to cover essential health benefits, such as prescription drugs, because it aims to ensure that all health plans will meet some minimum qualitative standards. However, researchers in health economics show that risk adjustment policy is far from perfect, and therefore health insurers still have incentives to discriminate against high-risk consumers and vulnerable populations. Additionally, although the Affordable Care Act, as I said, compels health insurers to include prescription drugs in their health plans, there is no requirement as to how this drug should be tiered within a drug formula, which means that health insurers can still classify all the drugs associated with high-risk consumers to higher cost-sharing tier. So there are some gaps in the regulation, and regulation could be improved. Additionally, there are some issues with regards to HIPAA, which is a privacy regulation that protects health insurers, that protects health data in the United States. For instance, HIPAA, the privacy regulation for healthcare in the United States, covers only identified data, and therefore some of the de-identified health data that can be used by health insurers to discriminate against high-risk consumers, and they may not be covered by HIPAA. And additionally, some of the data that are used by health insurers, such as our shopping habits, or whether we want to drink more beer when we're stressed, or consume more sugar when we do not feel well, are not covered by HIPAA because they're not considered health information. So, of course, regulation can be improved so that health insurers do not discriminate against high-risk individuals. However, as I said, it is very difficult for policymakers and regulators to make sure that there are no incentives for health insurers to discriminate. But second, I think that there is an added value of competition enforcers. I take into account the issues that I address. And I think the added value is that to the extent the competition authorities ban mergers, they actually reduce the possibility that this discrimination may actually take place because they examine the transaction ex ante. So, of course, if there is an issue of regulation, for example, if the health insurers do not obey the requirements by the Affordable Care Act or the health privacy regulation, there might be legal proceedings against them, but then there might be too late if the people that need health insurance coverage, they do not have access to health insurance coverage because of all these discriminatory practices. So I think there is a very important value and benefit if competition authorities intervene and ban this type of mergers. Another issue that was raised is the issue of benefits from this type of mergers, because to the extent health insurers have more information about our health habits, about our shopping habits, they may actually also improve our health. For example, they can send us some emails, some text saying you have to take care more of your weight, or you have to exercise more, or you should use inhalers if you're a high-risk asthma patient, for example. However, the point that I would like to make is that the high-risk consumers in the vulnerable population times do not adopt health habits, not because they don't want to, but because they cannot afford having a healthy lifestyle, because they face much higher structural barriers to adopting a healthy lifestyle. And as I explained in my presentation, there's a strong link between social determinants of health and health disparities, which means that if you are poor or you are part of a financially challenged community, your health is going to is not going to be good because of the increased stress that you experience in your everyday life, and because you cannot maybe afford a healthier lifestyle or a healthier meal. So even if health insurers try to nudge consumers to have a healthier lifestyle, they may not achieve this goal because of the relationship between social determinants of health and the health of specific populations. So I understand this comment. I think it's a great comment, but I have some concerns about this issue. Another point that was raised is whether how we should actually define who is going to be low-risk consumer and who is going to be high-risk consumer. And I think this actually relates to the regulation that is applicable in its case. For example, as I said, the Affordable Care Act has implemented a risk adjustment policy, which means that health insurers with sicker subscribers receive some financial assistance from health insurers with lower risk subscribers. However, because the risk adjustment policy is not perfect, some consumers and some patients are still considered high-risk consumers and not profitable consumers, because the cost that health insurers incur to have this type of patients enrolled, they're higher than the assistance, the financial assistance that they receive from the health insurers with low-risk subscribers. So in general, what health insurers are doing is, by having access to our health data, they can use algorithms and analytics to identify who is going to be unhealthy in the future, who is high risk for being diabetic in the future, who might have a heart attack in the future because he or she doesn't take care of his or her weight and issues like that. So what I'm really concerned about is that because health insurers are going to have wider access to health data after these mergers, health insurance will also be able to predict the level of our health in the future. And this is, I think, very important, because to the extent health insurers know what our health status is going to be in the future, they can design their health plans and contracts in ways that will discourage those high-risk consumers and unprofitable consumers from choosing this specific health plan. And what I think is really important is that health insurers do not discriminate against high-risk individuals and high-risk patients just by applying strategies that will lead to higher drug coverage costs for the high-risk consumers. They also apply other indirect discriminatory practices. For example, very often they avoid cooperating with healthcare providers that have a very strong reputation in curing specific diseases, such as, for example, hepatitis C or HIV. So there are so many discriminatory practices that health insurers can actually apply in order to avoid high-risk individuals, and this relates to Tatiana's comment about what are my suggestions for competition authorities. And I think that it's very probable that both in the health insurance services market and in the health insurance service market, regulation might not be able to solve all the issues of discrimination. And as I said, I think there's an added value of competition authorities intervene and ban this merger, especially because I think that the issues that I identified cannot actually, I'm not sure they can be addressed through remedies. And because let's say, for example, that the competition authorities say that the merger should be accepted on the basis that Aetna does not have access to consumers' health data. So they might accept, for example, there will not be data sharing between these two companies. But such a remedy actually incurs so many monitoring costs, and we cannot even be sure that this remedy is going to be accepted or even obeyed by the merged entities, because they have said actually in their public statements that they want this merger also to improve their data analytics. So I'm not even sure if the merging entities would actually accept this type of remedy. Another remedy that I might think is that other health insurers also have this have access to consumers' health data, so that they can also make predictions in the future. But then all health insurers will be able to discriminate against high-risk consumers. So their welfare and their health is and access to healthcare services is going to be reduced further. So my point is that we should be very, very aware of all the discriminatory practices that health insurers can apply against high-risk individuals, but also understand that remedies may not actually solve these issues. So maybe competition authorities have good reasons to ban this merger. Another issue that was raised was about whether this is actually a privacy issue or a public health issue, or it is actually a competition law issue, right? And I think that my answer is that these health equity issues and the discriminatory issues that I think I identified in the paper, in the presentation, may actually create some anti-competitive concerns. So I think that in this specific case, the health equity issues that I addressed also create some anti-competitive issues. And this is because, to the extent other health insurers do not have access to the same quality and variety of data that Aetna might have following the merger, they may actually attract all the high-risk consumers, which means that they will incur higher costs, and therefore they may actually leave the market. And then Aetna will be able to exercise monopoly power, which means that the health insurance premiums for all consumers at the end of the day are going to be increased. So I think that what I want to show in my paper is that sometimes we say that this is a discriminatory issue and maybe it's only a public health issue, but at the end of the day, I think it's a very important also antitrust concern, because discrimination may actually lead to increased market power. And I think this is an additional reason why competition authorities should ban this merger and be aware of the discriminatory practices that health insurers increasingly employ, at least in the United States. And I would like to speak a bit more also about the Google Fitbit merger. And I think that it is actually probable that we may see in the future more mergers like this, or mergers between health insurers and tech players. And we actually see that tech players increasingly try to gain access to our health data. We see that Google, for example, has completed some agreements with Mayo Clinic or other hospitals. And on the basis of this agreement, Google actually has access to consumers' health records. And Google has access to this health data because it aims to create some healthcare algorithms that will inform medical professionals and hospitals on how to make decisions about patients' clinical outcomes. So, for example, these healthcare algorithms, of course, may improve population's health because they may allow medical professionals to make better decisions on the basis of citizens' pre-existing health conditions, right, or the risk. But on the other hand, this type of algorithms may allow also healthcare providers to discriminate against the high-risk individuals and the high-risk consumers. So I think that the question that my paper raises, whether antitrust enforcers can prohibit these agreements or mergers that may have similar, that raise similar concerns, is a very crucial one, because always these entities will say that these mergers or this type of agreements creates substantial efficiencies and they're going to improve population's health. But we have to be aware that while some consumers may actually benefit from these type of agreements and mergers, some consumers and vulnerable populations will actually be hurt, because healthcare providers and health insurers may use these algorithms to discriminate against high-risk individuals. So that's why I think I wanted to clarify that this question, whether antitrust enforcers can ban a merger or say that an agreement should be prohibited because it may harm a specific segment of consumers, I think is extremely topical. Another issue that I would like to say is that in this merger, the Google Fitbit merger, the Commission also explained that there might be some privacy issues to the extent that Google may use health data, consumers' health data for in its online advertising market, for example, but this is more a privacy issue and it's not really a competition issue. But I think that there's an important issue here, and the issue is that by having access to this health data, Google can discriminate first in the health insurance services market. If it enters this market, it can sell this data to other health insurers that might also want to discriminate against high-risk consumers. And all the health insurers that are going to have access to this health data will actually increase their market power in the health insurance services market, because they may have exclusive access to this data if they have an agreement with Google. And the other issue is that discrimination, as I explained, also may allow some health insurers to increase their market power in the health insurance services market, and this may harm all consumers in the long term. And also, of course, by having access to this health data, Google can increase its market power also in the online advertising services market. And I think that by saying that this is a privacy issue or discrimination issue, we underestimate that this also may create substantial competition issues in multiple markets, as I said here, in health insurance services market, to the extent Google sells this data and analytics to other health insurers or enters the health insurance services market in the future, or it may also decrease competition in the online advertising services market. So I think that this issue should be addressed by competition authorities in the future in a more holistic way, by trying to understand how this type of mergers or agreements may affect multiple markets. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I would be extremely happy to answer to any other questions or address any other comments or concerns.
All right, I thank you very much, Theodosia. And I received many feedbacks, many positive feedbacks in the several channels we are now, WhatsApp and a YouTube channel and the like. And everybody's liking very much this panel. And I would say, as I haven't made any comment, it sounds like it's an everyone issue. everyone is a regulation issue. It's a competition issue. It's consumer and privacy issue for sure. And as we are seeing more and more, as long as we have the ecosystems involved, there is no single standalone solution, regulatory solution or a competition solution or even a legislative solution. Maybe we should try to build a innovative solution and working on the architecture of the algorithm, and maybe I believe we will see more and more decisions. Like I'm reading, I received today a notice, actually an information that the government of California, I'm not sure how they would monitor this, enforce this decision, but they forbid the utilization of an algorithm to measure performance, labor performance, and then the algorithm, as long as the worker is not performing as desired, the algorithm itself fired the worker. So, and the government just ruled it's not allowed, it's unlawful, it's against the law to do it. And I see in this, and I cannot see the effectiveness of this law in terms of making it real, forbidding the algorithm to discriminate and to firing people. But I see the will, and this will is everywhere. We are very much aware of the potential of the algorithms to do good things and to harm people's lives. So we should be really careful about building a solution or crafting a solution that would, eliminate this cream skimming problem in terms of regulation, or this potential problem to potentialize the adverse selective problem in regulation and so forth and so on. So my friends, I thank you very much for your time. Theodosia, congratulations again for your paper. Tatiana, would you like to make some comment? Final remarks, comment? Frederic, Vinicius?
I would just like to thank for the invitation again and congratulate once more for the event, Eduardo and Vinicius. These are great opportunities of sharing information between academics, foreign academics, Brazilian academics, government. Hope we can launch more events like this in the future. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
And
Frederic,
I would like to make a final comment, if it is
please.
possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Please.
So yes, I really agree with your point that the issues that I raised are regulatory issues, competition issues, discrimination issues. And I think what I would like to stress more in my presentation paper is that we cannot address these issues unless regulatory authorities, for example, cooperate with competition authorities. And I believe that competition authorities should take into account the health objectives of the regulation and cooperate with health regulations, because otherwise they may apply antitrust law in a way that may undermine the health objectives of the regulation. That's why I think that it's really important that antitrust authorities take into account the health objectives of its specific regulation. And the issue about discrimination in labor markets is really important, because now, even higher education institutions, such as universities, actually want to have access to healthcare algorithms in order to be able to predict students' health, for example, or employers want to have access to this type of algorithms because they want to see to what extent employees are going to be productive in the future. And these issues may also raise important antitrust concerns, because some employers may actually try to attract all the healthy employees. Other employers that do not have access to these algorithms may attract all the high-risk employees, and this create also important antitrust issues. So I really think that it's important to understand this. The discriminatory issues create opportunities for increased market power in multiple markets.
Great. Frederic, Vinicius?
Oh, yes, perhaps just some final words. Again, like Tatiana, I want to thank you for your invitation and for this outstanding seminar. What is very important to my sense is that we started with a very technical question, that is to say, how to implement antitrust rule in the control of a vertical merger. And we see that we have two current social debates, political debates, which are fundamental. The first one, how to have something like an holistic view of antitrust, and to conciliate this holistic view with well-grounded standards, legal certainty, and so on. So it is a first debate. And the second one is the effect of a predictive algorithm. That is to say, Tatiana spoke previously about double-edged sword. It is exactly that point. In fact, we have to find an equilibrium to make a balance between positive effects in terms of health, for instance, in prediction of diseases and so on, and on the other hand, a risk in terms of inequalities, discriminations, and so on. So in fact, I think the debate is not closed, and we have a lot of work from decades, I think, 4 decades, sorry, I think.
And absolutely, and I would like to reply also to Tatiana's question, what might happen in the post-COVID era. And I think that we may see more concentration in healthcare markets. More hospital providers in the United States may try to merge on the basis of the failing firm defense, because they have incurred so many costs. So I think that the issues that I raise are extremely topical, because I think we'll see more concentration and both horizontal and vertical mergers in multiple jurisdictions in the post-COVID era.
Thank you, Teodosia, and thank you all for this excellent discussion. And I agree with Teodosia. If you define well the role of competition or antitrust law, you're going to have a good role, a good important tasks for that. But just have to define some clear boundaries. But thank you very much for this wonderful discussion, and it's it. Thank you, Eduardo.
All right, guys. So just to let you know, I just shared the link to Teodosia's paper in the chat in the IBCI YouTube channel, right, Teodosia? So I just picked it up from the SSRN. And again, thank you very much for your participation, your professors who's watching us. I will close the event with a very strong thank you, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Congratulations, Theodosia. Congratulations, Frederic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was such a great opportunity for me. Thank you so much for this.